Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Squarespace. I'm starting a watch company. It's something that I've heard 1,000 times in this hobby. Regular people, hobbyists, enthusiasts, never seem too far from saying those words in this hobby, in this industry, and I don't particularly understand why. But today we're going to be walking through some of the big questions that one must ask themselves before they really flirt with the idea of starting something. Because if you've ever said you're going to do something and you're excited about it, because that's, of course, is the first reaction. You're excited that you're going to do something. It's actually one of the worst moments, because if this conversation inevitably ends with, you failing in your own eyes, it kind of has this disenchanting sort of feeling, right? I've seen so many people get really, really deep into watches, and they love watches, and they think that they have something to contribute to the world of watches, which, by the way, totally possible, totally true, right? But having something to contribute from a design perspective or from a business perspective or legal, whatever it may be, doesn't necessarily mean that you should turn your hobby into your business. So we're going to talk all about that today, because I've seen it so many times. What about some of the major questions we should be asking ourselves when this sort of comes up? So even if you're not considering starting a watch brand, which most of you aren't, of course, still, this will be an interesting conversation. And I have a couple of examples here about of successful brand startups. And we're going to talk about kind of analyzing, why were they successful? Why did they work? And why did so many hundreds of companies that were equally, excited at their inception fail? And just for kicks, by the end of today's episode, I'll talk to you a little bit about, if I were to start a watch brand, which I'm not going to, but if I were, what would I design? What would I like to see in the world? And why won't I ever produce it? It's a good place to start. Many of the brands that in this industry that have succeeded from startup, and by the way, this is normal in all industries, of course, generally speaking, are following quite a bit of momentum in a given trend. A good example, our first example, is Burneron. This is a very new startup. I believe this is, we're now in basically the first year of their production. Hyper limited, and we'll get to that later. But this watch, while completely original, there's no question about it. This is an original design in every sense of the word. The amount of work that's gone into every aspect, from case design to movement to typeface and even marketing, is original. It's a fantastic job they're doing. But of course, Burneron is riding the wave, the momentum of another, class of watches that has exploded over the last 5 years since COVID, basically, which is, fluid asymmetric watches like the Crash, or another example, a little less known, but also extremely elusive and desirable, the Falcone watches, right? So Burneron, again, while totally original, taking nothing away from them, of course, is riding within a wave of popularity. It's an emerging market. And because no other brands are really even competing in this emerging space, Burneron stands to benefit quite a bit. 10 years ago, the same watch probably wouldn't have been received quite as well, because the momentum in the market wasn't there. Look at Crash prices, right? 5 years ago, a Cartier Crash London was a $35,000 watch. Now it's a $200,000 watch. It was the same watch 5-10 years ago, same watch. Okay, but there was no momentum in the market. And if there's not momentum in the market, then you're going to have a harder time finding those buyers, finding buyers that are excited. Right? The watch can be just as cool, but this is the right timing. Another great example, of course, is Gerald Charles. The watch I'm wearing right here, my Skeleton Maestro. Why is this brand doing well? But clearly they're riding the wave, the popularity of Gerald Genta watches. Rewind 12 years ago, and Audemars Piguet couldn't really give away a jumbo. That sounds crazy to think about, but in 2012, 2010, 2012, the Audemars Piguet Jumbo Royal Oak, the most desirable Royal Oak, right? In different variations, of course, but the most desirable Royal Oak, one of the most iconic watches, the watch that the whole world wants, basically, was nothing. But over the last 10 years, you've seen growth that got faster and faster and faster over the last really 5. It's crazy to see what happened with prices and popularity of the Royal Oak, of the Nautilus, of the Ingenieur, of the designs of Gerald Genta, right? And of course, conveniently, or not conveniently, but I'm sure with tact, Gerald Charles, a true design of Gerald Genta, is coming to the market. right? All of a sudden, because this asset that the family had, that the owners of the company had, maybe 10 years ago was less interesting, right? The market wasn't screaming for another Gerald Genta watch. In fact, the market could hardly sell the most popular and known Gerald Genta watches, right? But over the last 5 years, the market has been screaming. So the company resurrects, which is great for the watch industry, right? Just like Burneron. But again, great for the watch industry. When the crowd is yelling for the right thing, right? Better is delivered. The crowd is served better, is better served. Better watches come to market and we can all rejoice, right? Another really good example, a little micro brand. Now, this is on the opposite side of the price spectrum, I believe, just a couple of $1,000s as opposed to these other two watches, which are more expensive. Toledano and Chan. This is a watch that came as riding that momentum of the basically the Rolex Midas world, right? And the Rolex Midas world is sort of akin to the Piaget world and all these, all of these polos and Emperadors and, this 70s kind of style, right? 70s style, again, with some influence from other places as well, of course. But these watches manufactured in stainless steel, not gold, but you've got like this lapis dial and you've got a weird, very 70s dress watch that still kind of feels weirdly, not just out there, but also kind of sporty. It was a weird design era. And just 10 years ago, nobody wanted a watch from the 70s that was anything like this. Too funky, too weird. If you got a Rolex on the name, it still didn't matter. The odds were you're going to sell it for gold weight, right? But and we'll talk more about distribution later and popularization. But the market, for many reasons, has turned its eyes to looking at that, that corner of production, that history, that decade. And now those prices have risen. And as those prices have risen and the market wanted more and more and more, Toledano and Chan said, why don't we just produce one? Right. So these three successful companies at different price points and different styles all saw trends in the market, saw the demand, right? They were demand first, right? It wasn't just, I have this beautiful watch that I want to see out in the world and I'm going to make it. I'm going to put all money and time into making this watch that I'd like to see. No, I think it starts before that. I think it starts with the market wants to see more of this. And I have an idea that could serve that demand, right? In a new, interesting way. And of course, there are a ton of brands as well that are introduced that suck, that try to serve that market and demand. And sometimes they do just fine. But these are three examples of people doing a good job in serving that market demand, right? And I think in three spaces that are kind of unusual and weird, and I think they've done a really good job. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Squarespace. I have been a loyal and loving client of Squarespace for about 10 years now. In fact, if I didn't have Squarespace as a partner, I certainly wouldn't be sitting here today. Squarespace from day one enabled me for success, gave me all of the material that I needed to build a powerful retail machine online. And I was able to do it so quickly because the tools they give you are so efficient, not just effective, not just functional, right? From their, fluid engine system that allows you to drag and drop designs, but their SEO tools, their flexible payment system to give your clients, but also beautiful. From day one, I was able to very easily choose through all their templates and pick a design language for my website. Theo & Harris always looked like a successful, older, well-funded company. And I never could have had that had it not been for Squarespace, right? Web design and development is a very expensive process, but not through Squarespace. They are the greatest partners I could have possibly asked for. So go on over and use the code Theo Harris for 10% off your first website or domain. Head on over to Squarespace. Enjoy. But moving on to the next portion of the conversation, let's say there is a demand, and let's say you've got a cool product that you can manufacture, and a lot of logistics went into that, and that's a whole other thing. But that's another piece of the pie here, a piece of the puzzle. But the next thing is, well, how do I get awareness? I mean, I could produce the coolest watch, right, in the space that is on fire in the market. But if I don't have reach, right, how am I going to sell? If I don't have a distribution of content, how am I going to sell? Well, again, going back to those three examples, there are three different answers here. For Burneron, the quality of the product was so good, and the production is so small that they don't need that many advocates. They don't need that many clients. They needed basically some good marketing material, some honest storytelling. The company's only making 24 watches over the next 10 years, so you don't need to create that large of a demand in the market. You only need to convince 24 people that these watches are great. And those 24 people, given the price point we're talking about, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, I'm sure, these sorts of people, generally speaking, are so invested in product, so invested in quality, that really a lot of that sale is right there. It doesn't need to be, because it's not a larger production, you don't need to convince thousands of people that this is good. And if you need to convince thousands of people, then it becomes a far more complicated equation, right? Because it's not just the product that needs to do the talking, it's the company. It's a significant distribution. To sell that many watches, you need significant distribution, right, of content. But here they need 24. They need 24, and the product can do it alone. Then you got a company like Gerald Charles, which is still very limited in production. We're talking about 1,500 watches. So it's still not a lot. It's still very, very small. Keep in mind, Rolex is 1 million, Patek is 60,000, but 1,500 is a hell of a lot bigger than 24. So how does a company like that reach that consumer? How does a company like that build an actual community of people that will fork over thousands and thousands of dollars? It's not 24 people. It's much different. Well, Gerald Charles as a company comes from, the leadership comes from extensive luxury distribution history, right? I mean, they brought Audemars Piguet to Italy, decades ago. This, the family, the Ziviani family that owns Gerald Charles, they've got extensive experience. They're not new to the game of luxury brand building. So they've gone what is basically traditional route, developing premium retail shopping experiences in Geneva, being present at trade shows, being present at watch fairs, giving people the opportunity to try these on and explain to them face to face why this matters, why it's brilliant, why it's worth their time and their money. This is a classic way this is the historical way to build a watch brand. Now, it's not to say that Bernard is not a watch brand, but it's so much smaller. Their tactics can be, far more confined. Gerald Charles is a multiple of the size, so they need to take a larger sort of corporate approach, even if they're doing it in a very real, very non-generic, face-to-face handshake sort of way. They could shake 1,500 hands in a year, right? That's how you build a brand. That's how you build a larger brand. The third example is Toledano and Chan. Now, this is the example that I think is what's more common? It's influencer marketing. Toledano and Chan used, TikTok. They used TikTok to essentially build up a community. And then once they had a community, they said, okay, well, there's a demand in the market for this sort of watch. We've got a distribution channel, which is our TikTok account, not only our account, but the accounts of our TikTok friends who will also promote. They could build out a pretty successful distribution model pretty quickly. Get awareness, create sales. The price point is low enough where, the burden on the company, the burden on the product isn't that high to convince or to compel sale, right? At a couple of $1,000s, a lot of people have enough money where they're like, yeah, what the hell? It's kind of cool. Boom, I'll buy it. It's different for Bernard, right? It's different. It's $50,000, $60,000. So you don't need this wide net. You need the perfect pitch for 24 people. With Toledano and Chan, it's different. For Gerald Charles, it's different. These are 3 different sorts of small startups, but they're all looking at these things in a very professional, methodical sort of way. Back to the beginning here, when I've heard it so many times, right? Lovely person, invested in the watch industry, loves the watch industry, spends their time, says, I really had this idea for a watch. I think it's great. It hurts me sometimes because it's such a beautiful, innocent thing to say. It's such a beautiful, thing to want to do. Of course you want to create as humans, right? That is the best thing we can do, right? To create in all the different ways that we're able to, whether it's through language or whether it's all these different ways. We want to create. We want to watch things grow, right? We want to express ourselves and be proud of ourselves. But when it comes to business, it is much more, it's difficult. There are a lot of considerations that need to be made that aren't just, I've got this concept for a brand. I've got a name. It's not like that. How do you find that middle ground? How do you find that, assuming you're going to do it, even as a mental exercise? It's a process of concession in many ways. Right? How forget about the distribution model. Even on the design level, which is where everyone likes to start because that's the fun part. The fun part's the design part, right? But how do you design something that would sell enough to be worth it? You can use me as an example. There's no secret, no surprise that if I were to design a watch, if I wanted a micro brand, what would the watch that I'd want to see in the world, what would it look like? It pretty much quickly get a sense of the fact that it would look, something like a little gold watch, maybe with an integrated bracelet, maybe not, but it would be very kind of 70s, sort of gaudy, uber thin, right? It would be something that is, generally speaking, not attractive. To most people, it is not what a beautiful watch looks like. It has almost nothing in common with a Nautilus or a Royal Oak. Okay, it is smaller, it is thinner, it is more, maybe it's effeminate, right? It looks, more like something that came off of Martin Scorsese prop list than it does, a cool Soho guy wearing cashmere sweats and living in the townhouse of your dreams, right? They're weirder and the market's really small. So if I were to produce a watch like that, I'd have to produce so few of them that I wouldn't be nervous at whether or not they would sell, right? I'm sure I could find 50 people to buy my little weird gold watch. Could I find 500? Because ordering that product is placing a significant bet. Right? It's placing a significant bet. Second, when I'm looking at the investment, do I want to manufacture it in gold, or is that too ballsy? Is it too much of a bet? Because now the price has to be really expensive, doesn't it? So I'm probably prohibitive. I probably couldn't manufacture a gold watch on bracelet. Could I do it like tank style? Could I do it on a strap? It'd be more cost effective, maybe equally as beautiful. Sure, I could do that. Should I consider maybe doing it in silver instead? Also kind of scratching that itch for, a material, of old, right? Cartier used to make things in silver back in the 1920s. They don't really anymore, but they used to, right? Well, what about bronze? What other metals are out there? Okay, what about sizing? Another consideration, right? If I could convince 100 people to be interested in this watch. And again, you don't want to pay for market research. You got to go on gut quite a bit. How many people are going to be turned off by the size by only a couple of millimeters? Should I consider this watch at 32, which is really where I want to see it? How many would sell at 36? Would I like it less? Does that matter? There would be maybe a small group of that 100 people that would say, I know he wanted this in 32. I know this is bigger than he wanted it. Right? But do those people matter? They don't matter to the bottom line. What does good look like? What does success look like here? Is it sales driven? Is it only sales? Is it, this is my uncompromising vision. This is the watch that I want to see in the world. And this is totally egotistic. And this is just for me. And if so, why'd you make 100? Why'd you make 100? Why don't you just make 4? Right? That's it. It's all these considerations, right? So all that said, if I wanted to produce a watch, what would I produce? Clearly, I'd be tempted to make a tank style watch, something divergent, but within that realm of tank, that makes sense. I love that watch. It's a classic design. It would fit with my wardrobe for sure. But if I wanted to just make money, what would I do? I probably wouldn't go with that because fewer people want a tank than they want a sports watch. Well, what sports watch resonates with me? Well, the GMT, right? Rolex GMT Master 2. It's my dad's watch. It's the watch that I bond with him over. That would make sense. More people would buy it, that's for sure. What could I introduce to the GMT that hasn't already been done? Would I even need to introduce that much at all? Green's my favorite color. People know that. Okay, I could incorporate green. But now this just becomes what? Kind of an uninventive, kind of, Photoshop, twisting some colors around to turn some profit and throw your brand on something. Sure. And then that no longer satisfies that desire to create. So it's this really funny balance. And I suppose, and this is a fluid episode, just kind of walking you through what this world and this decision-making process looks like. And I hope that it gives you a little bit of appreciation for, it's our hobby. It's a hobby. It's a beautiful thing. But a lot of other factors go into this. It's not just about the purest expression and the best watch wins. It's not the way that it works. There are other factors at play. There's a lot of money, right? There's a lot of money that needs to be risked. It's not just about art. It's about an understanding of the market, right? Bernard, I'm sure, could have made more watches and made some concession on production. So why didn't they? And what does that say about the people behind the brand, right? About their goals, about their aspirations. I find this all very interesting. I love watches, but I think I love kind of business even more. And what to love more than the watch business and the business of how all of this comes to be. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm sure many of you have never really seriously considered starting a watch brand, but I'm sure, or I hope, this episode did resonate on a level, because it is so human, right, to want to bring something to life, particularly something in the space that you're most passionate about. And that's what I love about the watch community, right? You have so many people from different walks of life that are equally passionate about this bizarre, somewhat useless hobby. And not only are they passionate about it, but they pour quite a bit of their time and resources into it, right? It's not just the time you spend watching YouTube and educating yourself. It's also the value of all that money. What does that money represent? Right? It represents your time. Right? I'm giving how many hours into this next purchase? So a lot of thought goes into it, and I'm glad to share it all with all of you. And if I ever do make a watch, I hope that you're very critical of me and it, and enjoy it. But for now, my contribution to this industry is not going to be strictly about making a watch. It's more about entertaining and educating and bringing personality to all of this. And speaking of which, if you haven't already, go down below to the link in our bio and join us over at The Zero. We've got a couple of amazing episodes that have recently come out. It's a private podcast community. I did a guide to Chrono 24 watch shopping recently that I think is awesome. If you've poked around Chrono 24 and just kind of don't know how to make decisions there about watches and what makes sense and what looks off, and I found some amazing, I found some amazing stuff on Chrono 24 that you're going to want to see, both good and bad. Head on over to The Zero, sign up. It's $10 a month, but you get credit to the Theo and Harris shop, and you get straps and all that stuff. So it's functionally free over the year, and I hope to see you on over there. Get out of here.